David here with Figboot on pens. Today I thought I would do something a little different. I wanted to discuss nibs. Specifically, I wanted to share with you my favorite nibs in my collection and talk about what makes each of them special to me personally. And that's a key point. This is a personal list of favorites. When it comes to nibs, there is no right or wrong. It's whatever works for you. There are folks out there who swear by their left-footed oblique double broad nibs, and other folks who only love a straight medium nib, and there is nothing wrong with either. I will say that over time, I've grown more adventurous in regard to nibs. When I was starting my pen journey, I was pretty much strictly a medium guy. The main reason was that I knew I liked mediums, and I didn't want to spend money on a pen only to have it arrive with a nib that I potentially didn't care for. But as I said, I've loosened up a bit in that regard, and now I'm a little bit more willing to branch out in regard to nib options. But I will say that this list is very medium heavy. Compiling this list was a challenge. This was a top 10 list, the Hall of Fame, not the Hall of Very Good, so tough decisions needed to be made. My initial list had 30 pens on it, but that was way too many. Then I cut that down to 20 and eventually 13, which is the top 10 plus 3 honorable mentions. It pained me too much to leave off completely. In regard to this list, I chose not to include any special grinds. The main focus is my favorite out-of-the-box nibs. Now, I will say I've had a couple of these nibs worked on, but it wasn't to change the grind. It was only to tune the nib to perform as originally intended. In addition, the focus of this list is on performance, not just looks. Now, looks can certainly play a factor, but there's several nibs which I love the looks of that did not make this list. So, in order to take a look at my top 10 favorite nibs, please join me over here at camera 2. To begin with, I conducted a little poll on YouTube where I asked viewers to let me know what their favorite nib was in their collection. There were some pens listed which made my list, but unfortunately most did not, and that's okay. As I mentioned, everyone has their personal tastes. The top 3 pens mentioned by viewers did not make my list, so I felt that they at least deserved to be mentioned here. Number 3 on that list was the Pilot Custom 823. The Custom 823 is a pen which many people rank as their favorite pen in their collection, and it's well deserving of the title. I really love mine. I did experience some flow issues out of the box with this pen. However, it's the only Pilot that I've ever had any issues with out of the box. I felt it must have been a unique issue because I had a couple of different well-known nibmeisters take a crack at working on it to improve the performance, but no one could figure out the issue. That is, until I had Mike Matsuyama take a look at it, and he was able to tune it up and get the nib working to perfection. But this nib is fantastic and well deserving of an honorable mention here. Next up is another pen from Pilot, and that is the Falcon. Now, this is one of the pens in my collection that I need to get around to reviewing sometime. It has a very unique looking nib. It looks different than any other Pilot nib that I'm aware of, and it just has a bit of bounce and flex to it that are really, really nice. I do care for this nib. There are just other Pilot nibs out there that I care for a bit more. And finally, on the viewer honorable mentions, we have a classic pen from Lamy, the Lamy 2000. This pen had the most votes on my poll, and it's well deserving. I will say though, while I do love the design and looks and feel of this pen, the nibs on the 3 different versions of this pen I have, haven't necessarily blown me away. Some folks feel that the sweet spot is a bit hard to find on these nibs. Personally, I haven't had any issues with that, but overall, I have to say for me, while I feel this is one of the best values for your money pens and a true must-have for any collection, the Lamy 2000 nib is in the really like it category, but that's not enough to cut it for my top 10 list. Okay, now on to my honorable mentions. I have 3. Each of these could have very easily made the top 10, but tough decisions had to be made. The first honorable mention is the Pelikan M1000. I love the looks of this very large nib. This was probably the first nib that I really debated about what size to get. This nib really goes against the norm. A medium is more like a double broad, and a fine is more like a broad. It has a fair amount of flex and bounce and is very smooth. I end up getting a fine, and it has performed great for me. I just love this nib. It's fantastic. Next up is a classic pen which narrowly missed cracking the top 10, and that is a Mont Blanc 149. There really isn't much to dislike about this nib. This particular one is a fine. I did have an issue where after a while it got out of alignment in a very odd way, and I had to have the Nibmeister Mark Backus line things up again for me at a show last year. He did a great job, and it is back to performing outstanding. And I just think it's a really classy looking nib as well. The last honorable mention is another Pelican, and that is the M800. Now this pen here is the M805, which has the silver colored trim. This nib was a revelation for me. I had always heard about people talking about a nib so smooth it felt like you're writing on glass, and I really didn't know what that felt like until I wrote with this pen. It is the epitome of glassy smooth, while still maintaining a high performance. The M800 is pretty much a perfect pen in my opinion, and the nib is outstanding. Enough honorable mentions, let's get to the list. And I decided to rank these. I didn't go for a no particular order, everyone's a winner type of list. Coming in at number 10, we have the most reasonably priced pen on this list, and that is the Faber-Castell Loom. So here we have at number 10, the Faber-Castell Loom. I have long sung the praises of this nib. It is my favorite stainless steel nibs and happens to be the only stainless steel nib which made this list. Not that size equates to quality, but it happens to also be the smallest nib on this list as well. This one is a medium. The main thing that I love about this nib so much is the feedback. It is a very distinct feedback. You could put a blindfold on me and put this nib on a generic pen and I could identify it very, very easily. It's smooth, but with a feedback that isn't rough or scratchy or with any drag. It's a unique feeling that's a challenge to describe, but once you write with it, you'll know what I'm talking about. And in the like $50 to $60 range, in my opinion, this is the best nib out there that you could buy. Okay, number 9, and it's a nib manufactured by Bock and comes attached to the Conid Bulkfiller King Size. So we have number 9, the Conid Bulkfiller King Size. This one is also a medium. I could be mistaken, but I believe this is their number 8 size. It's 14 karat gold and has an excellent combination of precision and smoothness with just a hint of feedback. It is wet and juicy, and you're really never lacking for ink flow with this nib. I don't come across this larger box size that often, but it is well worthwhile and it performs very well. Conids have been rather difficult to obtain lately, but I have yet to come across someone who has purchased one who was disappointed. The pens are machined very precisely and the nibs are a joy to write with. On to number 8. I wanted to include a pen from Visconti on this list, and I debated between two. I have this Millionaire here, which is an interesting pen. The cap and barrel are made from marble, and this pen has Visconti's 23 karat palladium nib. I have a number of Viscontis with this particular nib, but as you'll find with nibs of the same make and size, at times they can have different personalities. Of the medium palladium nibs from Visconti in my collection, the one here on the Millionaire is my favorite, but it's not the Visconti nib that I chose for this spot. That would belong to the Blue Ripple. So we have at number 8, Visconti Blue Ripple. This is a bit of an older model from Visconti and utilizes an 18 karat gold nib. They used these before transitioning over to the palladium, and within the last 6 months or so, they've transitioned back to utilizing gold nibs, which I feel was a good move for them. First of all, I just love the two-toned accents on this nib. It's very smooth and has a fair amount of flex to it. It's one of those nibs that when you give it to someone to try out for the first time, they typically say, ooh, as soon as they start writing with it. It's really a pleasure to use. And, I like that it's attached to a unique model as well. There were 999 of these made, but you don't come across them that often. Okay, on to number 7. And at this slot is a pen from another Italian manufacturer, but this one is relatively new to the market, only a few years old. The company is Leonardo, and the nib is attached to this Momento Zero Grande model. So we have at number 7 a Leonardo Momento Zero Grande. Now, I mentioned at the top that my collection is rather medium heavy. Early on, I found a large number of fine and extra fine nibs to be a little too scratchy for my personal tastes. This pen here is one of the reasons I've really begun to significantly expand my nib horizons. This is an extra fine, and it is just glorious. It's extremely smooth and just glides across the page. This nib showed me what really well-tuned extra fine brings to the table, and I very much like it. I find it helpful to use on lower quality paper, where a larger ink flow would be a detriment. I could have easily placed this pen higher on the list. I really like it that much. This is one of those pens that I enjoy handing out to friends and seeing their reaction when they use it. It is always very positive. On to number 6. It is from a well-respected brand that is unfortunately no longer with us. That brand is Omas, and the nib is found on this model, the My Lord Arco. So at number 6, we have the Omas My Lord Arco. To begin with, I know this video is all about nibs, but I can't help but take a moment to show off this Arco celluloid. It is one of my favorite materials. One of my prized pen possessions is this small piece of Arco. Quick side story, I acquired this small piece of Arco right here at a show, I think it was DC in 2018, through ASC, who had purchased the old rod stock from Omas when they went out of business. I would show this to folks and everyone was just in amazement. It is just so cool. It was originally a bit rough, and when I showed this to Brian Gray of the Edison Pen Company, he offered to polish it up for me, so I mailed it off to him, and his wife, Andrea, actually polished this up. It's a small thing, but I really like this small square of material. In regard to the pen, there is another somewhat long story that I've told before that relates to it, but this pen has been through a lot. It has been around the world several times. In the somewhat near future, I have a review of a Scribo pen coming up, and I'll tell the story again since it relates to the good folks at Scribo. But what we're talking about today is nibs. This nib is 14 karat gold. I had purchased this pen pre-owned and it had some ink flow issues. I sent it off to Mike Matsuyama to make some adjustments and it performs like a dream. While it's a medium nib, to me, it feels like it performs more like a fine. Now, I try to wipe down my nibs, before I show them on camera so that I don't have nib creep, but at times it can get a little bit challenging, so we have some ink on here. But this nib is amazing, and I adore it. It's very precise. It has a little bit of feedback and a little bit sharper than a standard medium nib. Okay, halfway through. 5 down and 5 to go. Coming in at number 5 is probably my favorite looking nib. I just love the design, and it has the performance to match. The nib is on the Danny Trio Genkai. So we have here at number 5, the Danny Trio Genkai. Just look at this thing. It is gorgeous. Danny Trio actually has 2 different nib designs. They also have a fireball design that I really like. If I should ever pick up another Danny Trio, then I'd like it to be one with that fireball design. But this one here is equally as stunning. Now, my research tells me that this symbol here in the middle is the Japanese kanji for emperor. I really like these little flares on the side as well. Kind of almost looks like little lightning bolts. It has a fair amount of bounce and writes a very nice medium line. It has a small amount of what I like to call good feedback, meaning that it just adds some personality to the nib as opposed to it feeling scratchy or like you're writing with a dull pencil. It is very pleasant. The combination of solid performance and a stunning look makes the Danny Trio Genkai nibs one of my absolute favorites. Getting closer to the top. At number 4, we have a pen from Pilot, and that pen is the Custom 845. So at number 4, we have the Pilot 845. This is Pilot's number 15 nib. It is 18 karat gold. If you don't know, on the side of most Pilot nibs, they stamp the month and the year the nib was manufactured. In this case, this nib was made in March of 2016. You hear that Japanese manufactured nibs are typically a step down in regard to line width from Western nibs. A Japanese medium will write more like a Western fine. For this medium nib, I find that it's more of a half step down, more of a medium fine as opposed to a straight fine. It's extremely smooth, but unlike the M800 where it's like writing on glass, the nib of the 845 has a touch of feedback that I really care for a great deal. It provides an effortless writing experience that helps make the overall price of this pen well worth it, in my opinion. Home stretch, 3 more to go. And coming in at number 3 is a nib that I had said on many occasions is my favorite, but when it came down to ranking these nibs, it came in at number 3. It is from Sailor, and it is the nib on the King of Pen. So for number 3, we have we'll just say Sailor King of Pen. This one is on the Sailor King of Pen Pro Gear Sky. It's 21 karat gold. Now, I mentioned this before, but nibs have their own personality. I have 5 different pens in my collection with the identical medium King of Pen nib, but each of them feels a little bit different. It's like identical twins that are tough to tell apart, but once you get to know them, it becomes easier to see the differences between them. My favorite of this King of Pen nibs is here on this Pro Gear Sky. I love the looks and the size of this nib. It just looks classy. I also find that with the larger Sailor nibs, as with the larger Pilot nibs, it loses the Japanese step down. This is a medium and it writes more like a Western medium or even a broad. It does have a bit of flex to it. So with a slight amount of pressure, it's more like a Western broad. Sailor nibs give me a feeling of precision and accuracy. This nib isn't overly firm, but it's not too bouncy, and it has some very pleasant feedback. While I care for all of my King of Pen nibs, like I said, this one here is my favorite and is high on my never sell this pen list. On to number 2. This is another very large nib. I believe it's the largest Pilot branded nib. It is the number 30 nib, which can be found on the Pilot Custom Urushi. So at number 2, we have the Pilot Custom Urushi. This nib is 18 karat gold. Like Sailor's nibs, Pilots have a very classy look to them. This is a large pen, so this oversized nib doesn't look out of place. Also, like the Sailor King of Pen nib, the line width is more Western than Japanese. This nib here is a medium and has a fair amount of bounce and feels extraordinarily soft and smooth. So it's not just glassy smooth, there's a softness with a hint of feedback which makes you say, whoa, when you first experience writing with it. It's a unique combination that I don't find on any other pen in my collection. And it's something I hope you're able to experience someday. If you're ever at a pen show or at a retailer which carries this model, I would strongly encourage you to test it out if you can. It's an experience you won't forget. Okay, we have arrived at number 1, the Grand Poobah, the pinnacle of this nib peak. And appropriately enough, there is a mountain peak stamped into this nib. It contains the image of Mount Fuji in Japan, and that pen is the Namiki Emperor. So here at number 1, we have the Namiki Emperor. Now, when I first saw this pen in person, the only thing I could see was the enormous overall size. This pen is comically large. And once you remove the cap, you're greeted with this extremely oversized number 50 18 karat gold nib. Your first thought is, how on earth am I supposed to write with this thing? It is an attention-grabbing pen. I was on a plane last year, back when we could actually travel, and I was using this Emperor to write some letters, and I could see that the people sitting next to me were looking at me a bit puzzled, which is understandable. This thing is huge. The most amazing thing about this pen, however, is the writing performance. While the nib is monster in size, it performs just like a standard medium Japanese nib. You can get a bit of flex out of this nib, but I also feel that it is more precise and finer than the smaller nibs of both the Pilot 845 and Custom Urushi. Even though this pen is very large, I find it to be very usable and very comfortable in my hand. This red feed is very cool as well. But regardless of the feed and the rest of the pen, the nib itself is worthy to have the title of my favorite nib. Using this nib will always bring a smile to my face. It is truly a joy to use. As with the Custom Urushi, if you ever have an opportunity to write with a Namiki Emperor, don't pass up that chance. So there is the list of my top 10 favorite nibs. It was fun putting this list together. I wanted to make it a point to produce these types of list videos a little bit more often. In the past, I tended to keep them for the end of the year. If you do have a favorite nib, which I failed to mention, then feel free to share it in the comments. This is one of those things that, I would check out when I was just getting started in collecting pens. I wasn't going to be purchasing some of the high-end pens on this list, but if I went through the comments and kept seeing a lower cost pen showing up again and again, then it was a leading indicator to me that that might be a pen worth checking out. So feel free to share your opinions in the comment. Until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.